Hello and welcome back to Voyage of a Time Wanderer. Today I am here to give a spoiler-free review of the Shetland Mystery Series by Ann Cleeves. So the Shetland series are a series of mystery novels set on the Scottish Shetland Isles, and they are set during the present day and written by author Ann Cleeves, who you may also know from the Vera Stanhope mystery books. That is her other kind of most famous series. The first book in the series was released in 2006, and the latest and final installment was published in 2018, and Cleeves has said that she considers the series to be finished now, so there is no future books to be published in this series. I started reading this series at the end of December 2020, and I first heard about it from my uncle, who had gone on a cruise a few years back that was through kind of the Nordic countries and included stops in Shetland, and he had seen this book series discussed and advertised and for sale in many of the gift shops in Shetland. So he picked up the first book in the series, and then when he was back in Canada, he was hunting at used bookstores and whatnot for further titles in the series. So I decided to pick up the series based off of my uncle's rave reviews, and I had actually just finished reading quite a bit of Peter May's catalogue, particularly his books set on the Scottish Isles of the Hebrides. So I had finished reading through Peter May's Lewis trilogy as well as some of his standalone books set in the Hebrides, and I was kind of looking for my next atmospheric Scottish mystery series, and the Shetland books definitely fit that bill. I finished up the last book of the series at the beginning of January 2023, so it took me pretty much on the nose 2 years to read through the whole 8-book series. My library often had long hold wait lists for the next books that kind of naturally spaced out my reading, and I find that if I binge through mystery series too quickly, I kind of start not enjoying them as much and the plots blend together, so I liked having a couple months wait in between each book. So I have now read all 8 of the main novels in the series, and I read all of them either physically or on ebook, so I didn't listen to any of these on audiobook. The series centers around our protagonist, Jimmy Perez, who is a police detective who has returned to his native Shetland following a rough divorce from his wife. And the remote setting of Shetland kind of takes on its own character throughout the series of the novels. Pretty much all of the mysteries, the setting is a very important part of it in some way, whether that is the small suspect pool of a tiny village, whether that be the fact that weather events sometimes mean that they can't bring in backup from the mainland for a couple of days. And so the initial investigation is really limited to just the people and resources that they have on the island at the time. Some of the physical landscape and nature of Shetland play important parts in novels, whether that be offshore oil drilling or unique bird watching opportunities. So in addition to following the character arc of Jimmy Perez as he kind of tries to get his life back on his feet while investigating these crimes, you also gain a real appreciation for the beauty of Shetland. The author has said that she started writing this series because she really loved visiting Shetland and wanted kind of to have an excuse for research trips. And it sounds like she's been visiting the Shetland Isles for at least the last 40 years, kind of since she was a young woman. And Shetland was also an important part of her and her husband's love story. They actually met on Fair Isle when Ann Cleeves was working as a cook at a bird sanctuary, and her husband was a visiting ornithologist. And so she really had a connection to the islands and loved visiting them, and that was kind of the initial impetus for starting writing the Shetland books. She originally thought it was going to be a standalone mystery novel, just the first book, Raven Black. And then after that book was published and received such a warm welcome from readers and reviewers, her and her publisher decided to turn it into a quartet, focusing kind of one book on each season in Shetland, and so those first 4 books each have a color in the title. And then after the first 4 books were published, Cleeves still felt like she had more to say about Shetland and its people, and so she wrote another quartet, and those 4 books all have elements in the title. I've seen 2 major reasons in interviews with Ann Cleeves about why she finished the series at the end of the 8 books. The first being that she wanted to end the series on a high note while she was still enjoying writing it and while readers were still enjoying reading the Shetland book. She didn't want the series to fizzle out because readers were getting tired of reading new Shetland books, or maybe she was getting bored writing them, so that was one of the reasons why she wanted to end the series kind of on a high note. And then at the same time, her husband passed away after she had finished writing the last book in the series. And because their story was so connected to Shetland and she had so many memories of the two of them together on the Isles, she just didn't feel like it would be the same, and it would kind of be too sad for her to go back and do further research trips to Shetland without him. So that's kind of some of the author's reasoning behind writing the stories and between finishing the series up. So why do I enjoy the Shetland series? As I've already kind of mentioned, I love, love, love the setting of these books. I love the remote, atmospheric, evocative Scottish Isle setting. I love the misty mornings and the fog rolling in over the hills and people walking along the cliff sides and going down to the beach. There's a lot of descriptions of what these islands are like that I really enjoy as kind of a side to the mystery at the heart of each novel. I find they are quite suspenseful and twisty. I haven't been very successful in predicting who the killer is in each book, so there's usually a couple red herrings to lead you astray and some good surprise twists along the way that make you kind of reevaluate the entire case. And I also enjoyed having an overarching character growth arc for Detective Jimmy Perez. You do really see him grow and change over the course of the 8 books, and having that human connection and thread of humanity throughout the books helps it be something more than just a series of thriller novels. All 8 books in the series were consistently good reads for me. I gave them either 3, 4, or 5-star ratings. The first half of this series was kind of a bit more consistent. Pretty much all of the first quartet were 4-star reads, and then the second quartet was a little bit more variable and kind of bounced between 3-star and 5-star books. But they were still all mysteries that I had a really good time reading, and I would definitely recommend this series as a whole. So I thought I would briefly go over each book, kind of give a 1 or 2 sentence description of the plot, when it was published, and what my star rating was for each one. I won't be giving any spoilers either for the plots of specific books or for longer character arcs. So no fear in watching if you found this video because you're curious about picking up these books for the first time, or if you're someone who has already started reading through the series but hasn't finished the series yet. There won't be any spoilers that will ruin your reading experience. So the first book in the series is Raven Black, and it was published in 2006, and I gave this book 4 stars. Raven Black is all centered around the Scottish tradition of Hogmanay, which is the New Year's Eve and New Year's Day celebration, and one of the key features of Hogmanay is that there are kind of superstitions attached to the first person to visit your house in the new year and what that symbolizes for your luck in the coming year. And so when the book starts out, we are in the home of kind of a recluse old man called Magnus, who is waiting for his first New Year's visitor. And then when day breaks, there is a murdered teenage girl found in the snow nearby, and suspicion instantly falls on Magnus because it is his house that was closest to where the girl was found, and he was already kind of viewed with suspicion by others in the town. And as Detective Jimmy Perez starts investigating this murder, he kind of starts uncovering some secrets and some aspects of the past that not everyone wants to be revealed. This book definitely hooked me into the series. My initial review after reading it on Goodreads talks about how much I loved the gritty atmosphere and how much it reminded me of the Peter May books, which was everything that I was looking for when I started this series. And so after finishing Raven Black, I definitely knew that I would continue on reading this series. The second book in the series is White Nights. This was published in 2008, and I gave it 4 stars. The title for this book, White Nights, alludes to the time and setting of this book, which is midsummer, and because Shetland is so far north, it's within the area where in the summertime it never really gets dark at night. A local artist is putting on an exhibit of some of her work when one of the attendees bursts into tears and says he can't remember who he is or where he came from. He runs away before anyone can kind of apprehend him and ask him more questions about this situation or try to provide him with help. And then in the morning he is found dead wearing a clown mask. And then there's another murder quite quickly after that, and so Jimmy Perez is convinced there's some sort of local connection, but he can't figure out how this strange Englishman is connected to Shetland. Then the third book in the series is Red Bones, and this was published in 2009, and it also garnered a 4-star review from me. This book centers around an archaeological dig that is taking place in a Shetlander's backyard, and there are some summer students who are here to get more experience on site at an archaeological dig. And when they uncover a skeleton, there are questions about whether this is an actual ancient body or whether this is evidence of a more recent crime. And then quite quickly after the discovery of this skeleton, the woman whose backyard is being dug up by these archaeological students is also shot in the night. And so that means that there is a number of threads that Jimmy Perez has to try to untangle. This was one of the books in the series that I enjoyed the most because I had seen an archaeological dig taking place when I was in the Orkney Isles in Scotland, and so I could really visualize kind of everything that they were describing. And then the fourth book in the series, and the book that wraps up the first quartet, is called Blue Lightning, and it was published in 2010, and I gave it 3 stars. This book definitely borrows a lot from Ann Cleeves' real experiences because it is set on Fair Isle at a bird observatory, and so Detective Jimmy Perez is back visiting his parents who live on Fair Isle when a murder takes place among the bird watchers that are here staying at this bird observatory, and there is a storm that kicks up so they can't get back up in for a couple of days because Fair Isle was only accessible via like helicopter or ferry. And there are maybe only 6 or 8 people who are on this end of the Shetland Isles at this bird observatory who could potentially be suspects. And so the tension instantly skyrockets and it becomes basically a closed room mystery. This book was not my favorite in the series, and there is something that happens at the end of this book that has a big impact on some of the characters. And I read a spoiler for that big event in the plot summary for book 5 when I was putting it on hold at my library while reading book 4, and that kind of, I think, also ruined my reading experience. So if you're reading this series for the first time and you don't know what happens in Blue Lightning, whatever you do, don't go on Goodreads to look at book 5, don't go to your library to put book 5 on hold, or do it with your eyes shut or something, because it's a pretty big plot twist that happens at the end of Blue Lightning. But a lot of websites reveal that plot twist in like the first sentence of their plot summary for book 5. So that's definitely something to be careful about if you're reading this book for the first time. Then book number 5, and the first book that kicks off the Element Quartet part of the Shetland series, is called Dead Water. It was published in 2013, and I gave this book 5 stars, and I'm pretty sure it's my favorite book in the series. The mystery in this novel centers around a man who is originally from Shetland, but who had left and gone to London many, many years ago, and had made a name for himself as a journalist there. And when he comes back to Shetland kind of unexpectedly and then is found dead, there's a lot of questions both around why he was back in Shetland in the first place and what story he might have been researching that led him to Shetland. As the investigation for this murder unfolds, it becomes more and more closely linked to offshore oil and gas drilling and kind of some of the political and community implications of that, and how different Shetlanders felt about the money that was coming in from that industry, the workers that were coming in from that industry, and the environmental impacts of that industry. So I found that aspect of the book and the plot to be really, really interesting, and one of the reasons why I gave this book 5 stars. This book features a new character who is part of the last 4 books of the series, and that is Inspector Willow Reeves. She is an inspector who is working on the mainland, who grew up in the Hebrides and comes in to assist the local Shetland police with this case. And so as someone who has family roots in the Hebrides, I really enjoyed having a Hebridean character join the cast of the Shetland books. And it was fun to watch her kind of try to work with the Shetland local police that we have grown to know and love over the first 4 books in this series. Book number 6 is Thin Air, and it was published in 2014, and I gave it 3 stars. In this book, a group of university friends have come to Shetland to celebrate one of their friends' weddings, and in kind of the hustle and bustle of the celebrations, one of the characters just disappears into thin air. The next day, there is an email that reads a little bit like a suicide note, but the character who had disappeared had been saying that she'd been seeing visions of this ghost of a girl who had disappeared in Shetland about 100 years before. And so detectives Jimmy and Willow feel like there might be more to the story and possibly a connection to this previous disappearance that someone in Shetland doesn't want the truth coming out about. Book number 7 is Cold Earth. This was published in 2016, and I gave this one 5 stars, and it was also one of my favorite books of the series. In this book, there is a mudslide that obliterates a side of a hill in Shetland, and it takes with it some outbuildings and a couple homes. And one of the homes that was affected was a croft, which is a farm that people had thought was unoccupied, but when they are doing the recovery work from this mudslide, they find the body of a woman in this house that was believed to be abandoned, and no one seems to know who she was or why she was there. She's definitely not someone who's local to the Shetland Islands, and the only clues that they find are a box near her body that had 2 photos in it and a scrap that is a beginning of a handwritten letter. There are instantly some questions about whether she was murdered before the mudslide or whether she was killed in the mudslide, and there's a lot of detective work that has to go into place to try to figure out how long she'd been in Shetland, if anyone knows who she was, and kind of why her identity was so hidden. And then the final book in the series is Wildfire. This was published in 2018, and I gave it 3 stars. In this book, a family who is new to Shetland moves on to a farm that some locals are kind of bitter that they're moving onto because it was repossessed by the bank when the previous owner couldn't make the mortgage payments. And so they are instantly negatively viewed by the locals, and they also have a son who is autistic, who has kind of a fascination with fire and gets into some mishaps at school that don't warm the local community to them. When the body of a young woman is found by their son in their barn, they are instantly embroiled into the heart of this investigation. While I did really enjoy this final book in the series, I felt like it dragged on a little bit, which is why it got the 3-star rating from me. And we spent quite a bit of time in the heads of people in this family rather than in the mind of Jimmy Perez, and so that is the reason why, for me, this series ended with a 3-star book. But I still found it a really satisfying conclusion to the series as a whole. So those are my thoughts on the 8 books that make up the main Shetland series, and there's also a couple of extras that are kind of on the periphery of this series. So there's a collection of short stories called Offshore, and these stories are a mix of Detective Jimmy Perez in Shetland, as well as Inspector Willow Reeves in the Hebrides. This short story collection for some reason seems really difficult to get my hands on in Canada. It seems like it was exclusively published on Kindle for Amazon UK, and so it's being quite difficult to track down a copy for myself, so I haven't read these short stories, but I'm definitely interested to, especially because we get a little bit more of Inspector Willow's backstory and her time on the Hebrides. There is a novella called Too Good to Be True, which features Detective Jimmy Perez, but it doesn't take place on Shetland. So this is a novella where he goes to investigate a murder on the Scottish mainland after one of his former acquaintances asks him to come and check it out because they aren't happy with the results of the local police investigation. I also have not read this novella, but I am able to get access to it fairly easily in Canada, so at some point when there is like a mystery readathon with a short story prompt, or when I'm really craving a Shetland book, I'll pick this one up, even though I think because it doesn't take place in Shetland, I don't know if I'm going to enjoy it as much as the main books in the series. There is also a non-fiction coffee table style book called Shetland, which has a lot of photos of the Isles. Apparently, I haven't seen this book either, but I believe in it Ann Cleeves shares lots of photos from her times in Shetland, as well as other professionally taken photos, and also shares a little bit about the history of Shetland, the flora and fauna that make the island special, as well as kind of going through an entire year on Shetland and the different events, festivals, traditions that make up a year in the life of an average Shetlander. And then of course there is the TV adaptation of these books, which is also called Shetland, and this TV series first aired in 2013 and it's still airing to the present day. There are 7 seasons complete now, and it's already been announced that it'll be coming back later in 2023 with the 8th season. This TV series started off adapting the books to screen, but they did it kind of out of order. So the book that they adapted in season 1 was book 3, Red Bones, and then in season 2 they started off with the first book, Raven Black, and then skipped ahead to book 5, Deadwater, before coming back to do book 5, Blue Lightning. And then after that, they just started their own storylines that weren't related to the books. So seasons 3 through 8 are set in the world of Shetland and following Detective Jimmy Perez, but they're not related to the stories that were developed by Ann Cleeves in the Shetland books. I haven't actually watched the Shetland series yet because I wanted to be done reading the book series first, and I just finished reading the book series earlier this year, particularly because those first seasons play around with the order of the books so much. You basically have to have read the first 5 out of 8 books to be able to start the series, and I knew that if I enjoy the TV series, which I think I might, I would want to watch seasons 1 and 2 and 3 back to back quite quickly, so I didn't want to have to be waiting to continue with the TV series to finish the next book that they were going to adapt. From the reviews that I've read, this TV series does seem to be quite well loved, and I think a lot of people who enjoy the books have also said that they enjoy the series. So now that I've actually finished reading the book series, I'm looking forward to trying out the TV series at some point this year. Overall, I have really enjoyed my time reading through the Shetland series, and I would definitely recommend them for people who enjoy reading mystery novels, particularly if you like mystery series that have a good character arc that follows through all the books in the series and also has a really gripping, evocative setting. Ann Cleeves has described these books as having a bit of a Nordic vibe, so if you're someone who's really enjoyed Nordic thrillers, you might like picking up these books. And she's also described the Shetland series as having a village noir atmosphere, so if you're someone who enjoys kind of some of the cozier aspects of small town life but wants a mystery with a little bit more grit than a typical cozy mystery, this would also definitely be a series I would recommend picking up. If you have read some or all of the Shetland books, I would love to know your thoughts in the comments, and particularly which book of this series is your favorite. And I hope that if you haven't read them, this video might have encouraged you to give the series a try. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, enjoy wandering through the pages of a good book. Bye.